I'm sorry, everybody. Welcome to the show. Um, Michael just kind of threw in some theme song music, so it was a great time. But this is our second episode that we're doing after the show, or I guess as it's titled in this, you recording after the show. But yeah, we're
Typos.
yeah, we're going over just really some additional thoughts we had that we weren't able to make in our podcast that we're doing. Video format on YouTube. So those of you who are checking it out, enjoy. There is more content. If you are just getting the audio on YouTube, you can check us out on Spotify as well. CC412 podcast. So we're continuing on with this. We had some additional thoughts here, and this past episode we just recorded, was just answering some questions from the audience, sharing some thoughts as far as, can I, shouldn't I, what's this, and so on. So we've got a couple other questions here that we wanted to kind of just give out. And we left off, you'll have to get the full context, you'll have to go back and listen to the episode. But we left off with how much should a pastor make? And Michael, my thought on that, because I mentioned, you mentioned something about, I can't remember exactly how you worded it, I'd have to go back and listen, about that a pastor should be paid enough to support the cost of living and yet humble. And one of the things I thought of with that, I remember listening to this in an episode, a sermon years ago, and I don't necessarily think I've personally heard it within churches, but I've heard of it in the Christian faith itself. That they would say is like, well, we want you to be humble, and it might be a psychological thing, but anyways, the sermon pointed out that some churches get into that mindset. We only want to pay the pastor this much because we want to keep him humble. Yeah.
Sounds like they're cheap.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of where I was thinking. It's like, it's possible. I don't know. But that humility aspect, and I don't think you were going this way, it just kind of popped in my mind, is that humility aspect, that's not the church's responsibility. Your job is not to pay the pastor so little so that he remains humble. Because what you're saying is you're in charge of his spiritual condition. That's not your job. That's God's job. If there's any reason that he needs to be humble, God will throw a thorn in his flesh and let you know that my grace is sufficient. But, yeah, I mean, as far as we as individuals, as long as give the pastor enough that he can, support his living, and that's, that's my thoughts on that. And actually, you know what? I did have a thought. You mentioned the, all these mega churches, pastors having all this luxurious stuff, which, yeah, I mean, that absolutely is 100% a red flag. It's like, okay, well, there's something wrong there. But I also, one of the thoughts that popped in my head is investments. I personally, it could just be me, but I don't think a pastor would be able to make enough to be able to invest or to make enough off investments, unless he actually did it prior to his pastoral ministry. I don't know. But I think that's a way in which they can earn an income. But again, that's his personal stuff. You as a church are responsible for paying him his due wages. But anyways, my point is like, hey, if he's got a private jet, it is a red flag. But at the same time, it'd be kind of cool. I mean, 99% of the time, these private jets are from false prophets. But, well, I wouldn't say more than 99% of the time. I don't want to say 100% because I don't know all of them. But I would say that, if a solid biblical pastor had a private jet, I mean, yes, people are going to want to know, where'd you get the money for that? It's like, well, I'll tell you, I got it from my investments. I had a bunch of land that I've, inherited or whatever it is, and I bought it for $5,000, or my grandparents bought it, and I just sold it for $500,000, whatever that is. But it's possible. Microscopically possible, but it's possible. So
yeah, when I'd been reading the George Mueller story, he got rid of the rentals for pews. So when you had said in the episode, like, oh, we don't charge them, in the old days, you would rent a pew, and that was a sign of status of like, we have the front row, but you're paying for that. And that was something he saw as like unbiblical, ungodly. Like, we are getting rid of that. We're getting rid of people feeling pressured to tithe, also as a statement to say, like, look at us, we have enough money. And
Right.
even we've had a lot of people from Germany stay with us in our Airbnb rooms. They say they don't go to church because it costs money. They take a
Oh,
tax
wow.
from you. And even back in George Mueller's day, they did that. And so he created little like house churches to go around the government. And I was like, this is literally still happening. And so I didn't realize, like, now if we have someone from Germany, I'll be like, you need to not go to the big
Yeah.
churches because they're going to try to take money from you, but find like a house church, which I don't
Right.
know if, it's probably still not allowed by the government because the government wants the money. But that was like an interesting perspective that I thought of when you were saying like we don't charge. I was like, yeah, we don't and we shouldn't, but it's interesting how, you know, maybe they are not reformed, picking that word back up, and like seeing that like we should not be charging people for that and putting it towards all money.
Yeah. There was actually, I could be wrong on my comment, but I think if I remember correctly, I think Charles Spurgeon. I mean, he was such a powerful preacher that he was forced to sell tickets, and it wasn't, they weren't doing it to make money, but they were doing it because he made such an impact that wherever it was that he was at had limited space, so they were forced to sell tickets. And if I remember correctly, remember that history, I could be wrong, that there was kind of like the alternation, like, I'm going to go this Sunday and then somebody else is going to go the next Sunday kind of concept. But no, yeah, we should not sell tickets to get people in the church. But in the case of Spurgeon, he had no choice. It's like, guys, we can't take any more people. If you want in, we have to come up with this ticket thing so that way we know what our limit is and how many people we can have. And there's more to that. I don't want to say too much. I'd encourage you to check out Charles Spurgeon in the history of that to get a more accurate answer. But it's just an interesting fun fact.
Yeah.
So
And then from there, the next question we didn't get to, how should the church handle congregational pastoral search surveys? My answer was, because I don't got, oh no,
you don't
I do
got
not have a lot of thoughts on this, but I know you've been through this a couple times and you have a lot of friends who have been through this. So I was like, this is one that Bill is definitely going to have better insight on than, like, I've seen it once growing up in a church and going to different churches, but I was a kid, so I didn't get the full impact of what was going on behind the scenes compared to if I were an adult.
right. Well, and there's I'm trying to look because I want to get it word for word. A particular verse that comes to my mind, and I want to say it's in 2 Timothy with a question mark tone, making sure that I have the right passage here. I probably have it underlined, like I'm looking at it, and controversies. Oh yeah, here we go. Love yourself. Okay, sure, we'll go with this. How should churches handle congregational pastoral search surveys? This was actually brought up months back. There's an individual that talked back and forth with, a good friend of mine, but they've been without a pastor since September of 2023, and as far as I'm personally aware of, still are without. But which will say there's more to that. When it comes down to these surveys, what they did is they issued a survey to the congregation, and this was given to me. Like they said, they sent me the picture of this survey, and was wanting my thoughts, and I'm like, you need to throw that in the trash because they're basically telling the sheep, what do you want to be fed? Or like a dog, they can't have chocolates, and a dog wants chocolate. It's like, no, that's going to kill you. So, and so that was a big concern of mine, and so I decided to stick this question in there. Is surveys themselves, pastoral search specifically, don't do. There's biblical qualifications for what to look for in a pastor. There is no mandate as far as how lengthy of an education he has. Associates, bachelor's degree, master's, doctorates, PhD, which I think is the doctorates, or no education. There's no mandate. But going back to that, I don't want to say that education is not a qualification. They need to be able to teach. In order to be able to teach, you need to be taught. So, besides the point, these to have a survey of what should we look for in a pastor, I wouldn't even answer those. I think what that shows, in fact, actually, I was listening to a video this individual sent me. They're like, hey, listen to this. They talk about these surveys. And one of the things he pointed out, and I made it clear to them, it's like, wow, that's a good point. I didn't consider that. Is 2 Timothy chapter 3. Verse 1, understand this, that in the last days there will come times of difficulty, for people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, and a whole bunch of other qualifications. But ultimately within that, I would say within the lovers of self is, actually, I don't think that's the particular verse that I wanted.
That's for the next question.
Is it?
The end
no,
times?
No, it's not. No. Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, the passage about having the ear tickling, basically they're going to want a message that satisfies them. They want the sugar cookies, and that's pretty much where these surveys come into play. And so I would say if your church is doing a pastoral church survey, one, don't fill it out. 2, confront the church and let them know this is not biblical. If you want to look for a pastor, don't ask me if I want them to be 20 years old, 30 years old, 50 years old, because I'll give you my preference, but it's not going to be biblical. So
I guess I didn't even know what that was then, because I've never even heard of that.
What, the surveys?
Yeah, they would actually ask you like a multiple choice, tell us what. I always thought, because when I've been in churches, they don't really tell you. They say we're going to be bringing a couple people in over the course. Usually it's in the summer. I don't know. So it's like over the next couple of weeks, we're going to switch off between people to see how they fit in. And then if you're a member, you get to vote, which probably is more online. But I think it's a lot more too with the elder, like the leadership. And then as long as the whole church doesn't hate the person, which sounds terrible. But yeah, I couldn't imagine like you're in school. Tell us who you want, because we're going to want something, as you said, not biblical. Like, of course, we love looking at young, beautiful people, but is that someone who is going to teach the word of God? Like, maybe, but maybe not. There's no way to know.
Yeah, and going back to that, and then we'll get to that last question here, is within that, because I was asked to write a letter, or I think I asked. I was like, hey, how would you be comfortable if I wrote a letter about this? And I did. I didn't send it to them. Like, I didn't put it in a mail and send it off. I wrote up my letter about this issue, and I gave them this link. It was a Google Docs, but I gave them the document. I was like, read this over if you're comfortable with it, because they know more about the church than I do. So if this is in line with what you're seeing at the church, reword it. Make it personal, and they did. Actually, from what I was told, 2 or 3 people took the letter and submitted it in their own words. But within that, one of the things I mentioned, this is probably going to get me in trouble if they find out. One of the things I mentioned is Charles Spurgeon. Going back to him, he was, I think, 16, if I remember right, when he became a minister, when he preached his first sermon. And then at 18, he became the pastor of a church. Never had a theological degree. Obviously, he's too young by social standards. And next thing you know, like I mentioned, he's got 6,000 people. But just biblical qualifications alone. It doesn't matter what the age is, what's going on. Throw the survey away. So, is it my turn to ask questions?
Yep.
Yeah? All right, this last question. I'm actually curious because I don't think we've personally talked about this together yet. How should Christians view end-time prophecies and the mark of the beast?
Yeah, so this is another one of those where it's like there's so much to it, where I just chose kind of like an easier way to digest it. So if you didn't want to spend hours and hours of doing like the deep dive in Revelation, and even so much of that is like people disagree about so much of like, this is what that means. It's like, well, do we really know? Probably not. because or someone was like Revelation, it's revealed to us, like it can be revealed, it's still coming. So but within that, I focus in on Matthew 24, which is the subtitle is like signs of the end of age. I said in particular verses 4 through 14. I said maybe read it, but I'm not going to read it, but I'll summarize it. If you're watching along, then you can read it because I think it's good, but it talks about, you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. You're going to have earthquakes and famines and basically nations going head to head. Like these are things saying the end of times are coming. But then in 36 through 47, it talks about the day and hour are unknown. So I think that's an important thing. As someone I talked to was like, they have a phrase, I guess, in the South of like, roll up your end of times mat. Like we still need to be living now in the time, because at the end of the day, we don't know. Like we can feel the tremors of what's coming, and we see in even what you read, I know Thessalonians talks a lot about that too, and I think Timothy is what you were reading before of like people becoming lovers of themselves, turning on their family. Like we're starting to see a lot of that now. So that's kind of like a basic, like we can see from the Bible where we're headed and how society is going. But that's also not to say that like this has happened many times in our past of like things going astray. And like at our church that I go to, they're like, he can come any day now. Like we don't know, but also God can still save and have a revival. So it's kind of like you got to keep living and do all that you can. And then in particular with the mark of the beast, I had found that was in Revelation 13, 16 through 17. And that one I can read because it is a bit shorter. But He also forced everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or on his forehead, so that no one could buy or sell unless he had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of his name. And so I know the most common thing I've heard, which is like kind of political, I guess, but people were asking, is the COVID vaccine a mark of the beast? And oh man, I hope it doesn't get you kicked off of YouTube, but because I said that word. But basically what most people will say is that no, because that like this is very clearly will impact, and that we're not seeing that now, but you'll have to make a conscious choice of turning your back away from God to saying, I will follow this beast, basically. So that's what a lot of people were, I don't know, like the conspiracy theories, which, I mean, that sounds terrible to say too, of like looking at all these different things coming up of like, well, is it the chips that we put in our wrists and like are going to put in our heads? I'm like, I don't know. It sounds creepy to me. And I'll be the first to say like, I don't want any of that. But I think a lot of it, is just making sure you're still reading the word, have a relationship with God, letting the Holy Spirit within you kind of show you how you're supposed to live and what you're supposed to do. Because if you are on track with God, you're not going to accidentally take the mark of the beast. And that's what like my brother-in-law will say, and people, and I'm like, oh yeah, that is encouraging to know. But you definitely see in me closing this out to let you talk of like, you see society based on what the Bible says, and it's getting pretty creepy and pretty bad.
Yeah. And see, my the end times, and I mean, just be ready. Like there's so many. I understand it's something that we need to profess. Like those people in those cartoons or movies. The end is near. Repent, and have that whole wicked sign on their, on them. But I get that. I think that itself might be a little extreme, because. And I can't personally say much about it because I've only seen what's in the movies. I haven't been blessed to see one in person, but to my knowledge, and I'm probably 100% wrong on this, that's all they focus on is the end is coming. I mean, if you profess the name of Jesus Christ, then that's a purposeful call or warning. But the end times, I mean, that's not something that's ever concerned me. I take that back. Prior to about 8 years ago or something, I mentioned, because that was like a big turning point in my theological understanding, the whole pastoral issue that I had. He was Arminian, and like I mentioned, off doing other stuff now. But he, what was I going to say there? Prior to that, I remember, because there was some storms, like tornadoes, I think, were going on around this area. A lot of them more than you would think, and it made the news, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's here, the end is coming. But then I at this point in time, I'm still not fully knowledgeable with the book of Revelation. I should be, but I'm not. And the reason is we're not going to completely understand that. I don't personally believe we can. Men like John MacArthur, he'll say it's very easy to understand. I'm not going to argue that. I could be wrong. But with the different theological views of the end times, it's like I'm just going to say one of them's right. Because you have the prophecy. This is future prophecy. And this is we're basically the people of the Old Testament hearing a prophecy, trying to understand it. The prophecies that were revealed in the Old Testament were not fully understood until they actually happened. So that's where we stand with the book of Revelation and the end times prophecies is, somebody's right, somebody's wrong. That doesn't matter. We need to focus on Jesus Christ. This is here for a purpose, but the mark of the beast specifically, I don't even bother with. It's like, okay, cool. Like I remember years ago, we'll probably wrap up. We're running a little over time here. But I remember seeing a video years ago. This lady had this entire presentation about how the Monster energy drinks was the mark of the beast and it's evil. And I when I first saw that, I'm just like, oh no, bless your heart, because it's a drink. Whatever the particular motives behind that is, I'm not even going to consider that as the mark of the beast. I mean, if it is in Hebrew, it says 666, okay, but based on what I'm seeing here, it looks like they're just using a graphic to illustrate a claw mark. It just so happens to look like the Hebrew. But the mark of the beast isn't something we need to be concerned about. God himself will place his protection, his mark. He will protect the true believers. The mark of the beast is something Satan does to the unbelievers. So for a Christian to be concerned about getting the mark of the beast, that's not necessarily. I mean, it's not something we can control. I mean, if we're Christians, there's no possible way we can get that mark of the beast. If you want to go get a chip in your hand, I would personally object against it, but not because it's the mark of the beast, but because of all the other stuff that can come with it. Big brother's watching you. He's holding your hand, ironically, and there's been so many warnings about this is the mark of the beast. Credit cards, checks, maybe. Like we said, the chips, energy drinks, whatever else have you, COVID, vaccines, all that. And it's just going to continue. I'm a little curious what's going to be like in 20 years, what kind of weird stuff that people are going to say, this is the mark of the beast. But
you think we'll still be here?
I hope not. I actually had a theory based on my personal experience and, what I grew up in to where the world's at now. My personal theory is that he would come in our lifetimes. But at the same time, we don't know the day or the hour. In fact, I mean, this idea that Jesus Christ is going to come back in our lifetime, this is something that they thought of years ago. Protestant Reformation.
Every generation.
Yeah,
my mom's like, generation. My mom was telling me he's coming back soon. Yeah. And even we were just talking at our home fellowship, one of the older gentlemen became a Christian in like 68. And he was saying how like evil that time was. Like everyone was getting shipped off to war. Every day they'd say this many Americans died. And I think it was the Vietnam War. And then the president was assassinated. And you had all of these political movements going on. The whole country was like in conflict with each other as well as with these other countries, and young men were getting sent off to die and families being broken apart. And it's just like, oh, wow, that sounds a little bit worse than right now. Right. So it is true. Like each generation will see like something horrific. Yeah. And even in the first century, they thought Jesus Christ was going to come back in their days. So, and then now, next thing you know, 2,000 years later, he still hasn't. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think any of that's really something we should like be in fear of, because I mean, we've been warned that it will happen. We know why. I mean, if anything, be excited. So, I think that's it. We ran over time, over our little preferred limit. Do you have any other thoughts you'd like to throw in there? Yeah, I would say I did not notice little baby Yoda up there the last time we talked, and I've just been staring at him the whole time, and he's like, oh, like, he doesn't have a spotlight, but I'm like, it kind of looks like he's like, I deserve a spotlight. So it's just like a comical thing. But the whole time we were talking, I'm like, was that Baby Yoda there before? And his name is not Baby Yoda.
Right there's Chewbacca.
Oh yeah, I can't see that.
Yeah, and then right here, in between my fingers is Darth Vader thing. I used to have a whole. Actually, I still have it in a box over here. But I had a whole season where I was collecting action figures of Star Wars. I've honestly, I've probably got like a couple $1,000s worth, but I'm out of it now. I've got here biblical replicas, books, stuff like that. But yeah, Baby Yoda, he stayed up there out of the box because he's kind of worthy of that. So that's it. Are we typing something that I need to wait on?
We mentioned that we were gonna look up what juju meant, and I was like, oh snap, can I look that up fast? But
juju.
I'm like trying to move all my. The first thing that comes up is believed to be derived from the French juju, plaything, though some sources claim it is from the Hausa language meaning fetish or evil spirit. I don't know. West African origin, possibly.
So evil
a special
spirit,
sort of magic.
So there's a bunch of different interpretations of what it could be.
Shamanistic traditions. Good juju, bad juju.
Well, see, there you go. Bad juju. You can use that for Halloween. Isn't that what you used it for? Is that what I said? Halloween, bad juju?
I have no idea how you talked about it.
All right.
Oh, man. Yeah, maybe we just stop talking. Close this out quick.
All right. Yeah, that's all we have here. You got that little theme song that you played before we get into this?
I think I stole it from someone else. Ba-da-da-da-da-da. Ba! Bye.
Yep. See you guys later. Until the next one.